our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet, I ask you, is not an alien force already among us?
The gravest error a thinking person can make is to believe that one particular version of history is absolute fact. History is recorded by a series of observers, none of whom are impartial.
RF-4 jets spotted and took photographs of a huge carving in the desert over 1,000 feet across.
No tire tracks and no footprints.
The Germans had a settlement on the moon, they had a settlement on Mars, and they were doing this as early as 1939.
Between the age of 16 and 17 years old, I was transported to the moon, and after 20 years, I was age regressed back in time and then returned to civilian life.
Extraterrestrial spacecraft have appeared over nuclear missile installations and have completely powered them down.
We put together programs that went all the way out into the galaxy, not just this galaxy.
According to some estimates, we cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
This money is going into underground military bases and secret space programs with technology far beyond what many of us could even realize. Everything we learn is designed to program our minds away from the truth.
This film is the red pill that wakes you up to what's really going on in the world. And at some point, this is all going to break open. The more you get involved, the more compromised you become. They may actually kill you.
Hello, I'm Corey Goode, and I'm here with Rene Armenta, the Director of Art for Above Majestic. Welcome, Rene.
Hi, how are you?
Doing well, thank you.
Good, good. I'm so happy to be here.
Awesome. Could you start off by telling us how you joined the team?
Sure. It was back in 2016, and I was looking at one of the cosmic disclosure transcripts on your website. And there was an advertisement to, hey, can somebody help out with a logo? And I submitted a few logos, and next thing I know, I was invited into a smaller private group to have discussions, and then that's where Roger and I met.
Right.
And
yeah, in the beginning, you even started out helping us with presentations, and it turned out that you had quite a bit of experience in that and had done it for a prestigious awards ceremony.
Yeah, I did do for the Oscar nominations, which is a press conference that they would hold every year, and obviously, and so I would help out with that presentation. That would be something I would craft and create for them.
And as we saw more and more of your skills, we started asking you to do more and more. We started having you depict craft that I had been in or witnessed in the secret space program, and even graduated to animations from there.
Mm-hmm. I mean, even just as far as PowerPoint, I think the first presentation I saw you do was just basically blue screen with white text. And I was jumping out of my skin to just like, I can help here. And so that's where our friendship with really the camaraderie with Roger and you that just began to develop. And we did our first projects in January of 2017. Actually.
2017.
Yeah. So it's not that long ago.
Excellent. So let's talk about some of those projects that have led up to you working on Above Majestic.
Okay. So we met all together, the three of us at Conscious Life Expo 2017.
In Los Angeles.
Exactly. That was our first time working together. And that's where you began to see some of the work that I had been doing on my own. And I had recently learned 3D modeling. And in the process of learning 3D modeling, that you test yourself by setting up your own projects. I was building spaceships for no reason.
Why did you learn 3D modeling?
3D modeling, it was really just a calling. I couldn't stop myself from actually exploring it. I've always been interested in special effects and, of course, the romantic side of Star Wars and Star Trek and all of that. And so I wanted to visualize my own. Sometimes you get a hunger to visually see what you have not yet seen represented. And
yeah, well, for those out there who have a hunger to visually see what we're talking about, let's go ahead and start going through some of the art and animation that you created for presentations and for Above Majestic.
Okay. So I believe we have it set up here first to look at the title sequence for Above Majestic.
So it starts off obviously with this epic, awesome shot of UFOs flying to the moon with Nazi insignia on them.
Yeah, these are basically the Haunebu craft. This was my imagining that perhaps they would be sending a whole group to supply and begin building out. So this is pre-LOC,
right?
In my imagining. And
true enough, when they were building out the Lunar Operation Command in the late 30s, they were flying there in craft that they had built, they being the Nazis, and were setting up small little establishments there that allowed them time to build out the larger Lunar Operation Command. You've also depicted a space station that is an actual space station that the military-industrial complex has. I just gave you some sketches and told you how it operated and what it was made out of, and you did a really good job of putting this together. It's very accurate.
Yeah, thanks. This was probably our third or fourth attempt at this one, and I really enjoyed with the fuselages and the TR-3Bs there. It was really great.
Awesome. And we also depicted quite a few of the transitional technologies. The Nazis and the Americans in the beginning used actual submarines and hooked up the electrogravitic technologies to them and actually flew them out of our atmosphere.
Yeah, this was such a fun project to work on, to basically refit an old sub with what I envisioned as the new technology or the transitional technology here. So they're moving towards Jupiter. And again, just a nice dramatic shot. Roger requested me to do a combination flag here with them. So I did an original design of what I thought could be something somewhat neutral.
Well, at the end of the title sequence, as the interstellar research vessel flies into the sun, how did you get that effect, or how did you come up with that effect?
Believe it or not, some of it was just watching some tutorials on After Effects to create the sun, and then I used my 3D model and rendered that, composited that together. Roger had great direction on what he envisioned this is, and I added my own 2 cents, and we really created something sensational here.
It was a great title sequence. So let's talk about the Arnold Sommerfeld. It's an interstellar research vessel that the United States Navy put into service in the 1980s, early 1980s. It is actually the craft that I served on. I was assigned to that craft for about 20 years. A lot of my missions and work took me off the craft for long periods of time, but that's where I was assigned. In the beginning, I described it as a long cylinder that was squashed, and the Marines that were assigned to the craft, as a derogatory statement, they would call it a hot dog, because on the side there were a couple little protrusions that they visualize as the buns of a hot dog. So when I first started discussing what this craft looked like, it was very difficult to help people envision it. I would draw it, and sketch out, but it just never turned out right until I worked with you. And we were able to connect somehow, and with the art it's not really art, the sketches that I made, you were able to extrapolate very closely to what the vessel looks like.
I'm so glad to hear that. What we're looking at here is basically the first generation drawing, and this was actually based on probably the images that showed up in Cosmic Disclosure, and that's really all that I had at the time. And I was just so excited to be working with you that I was just, this was not even requested. I think I just made this one. And that, I think that's probably what kind of caught the attention, that, what can we do with 3D as opposed to a Photoshop version? And then you began to create drawings for me.
Very artistic drawings.
These were great. I mean, these are so essential to the process. And I believe we did this over the phone. Or we Skyped this. We weren't even in person.
Yeah, I drew them out on paper, and then I actually photographed them with my phone and sent them to you.
And here we have, as opposed to the rectangular buns, we created the more round buns, and you gave me direction on the top portion as well. And so here's basically the very first. This is kind of like my first approval before I detail it out. Like, Corey, am I getting close? And this is where I was getting close.
Right, and these craft are, they were created and built by submarine engineers in the very beginning. So it's the transition from submarines to these research vessels is pretty interesting, because you can see even in the current image we have of the research vessel that it has characteristics of a submarine a little bit.
Yeah.
And the submarine was suited perfectly for outer space, almost perfectly. Very little modification. And the engineers who developed these vessels based most of their concepts on how submarines work, the enclosed atmosphere control and all of that.
That's so interesting to hear. I actually was building this before I built the early German sub. So I didn't even, it was just kind of an assumption for me at this point, I think, in our conversation.
Right. It was just a natural evolution that occurred. And we'll in a little bit here, we'll see some of the more modern craft that we evolved to.
So this is just one of the beauty shots that once I got the model pretty much close, you mentioned that it had kind of bulbs of technology on the outside.
Pods.
Exactly, those pods that had like a flight deck on either side for the buns, so to speak, and
for smaller triangular craft that flew in and out of the bays. And the pods had all types of instruments that gathered scientific information and also telemetry for security of the solar system, which is Solar Warden. That was what it was developed for, being a warden for the solar system.
Wow. In this drawing, you were trying to communicate that it's all modular.
Right.
And that it looks like inside you almost unscrew it like a cigar case.
Right, well, it is. It's a large cylinder fuselage, and there are different areas that are have silver bands all the way around. And those silver bands split in two, and they're actually two pieces that come apart. And while in dock and outer space, they can swap out these sections, and they can also, on certain bases, like in Utah and in Antarctica, they fly these craft down in and do all types of maintenance on them. They can add completely different sections to make it a longer tube, or they can take it in its current configuration, remove the hull, and then remove inside all of the little modules. They could have different modules for different types of experiments or missions, and those modules are taken out, and then new modules are put in, and then it goes on a new mission.
I'm so excited to have that possibility that we can even visualize this part in the future. So
Yeah, some of these craft, as they add sections on, they get quite long. And there are larger craft, these interstellar, basically motherships that are a kilometer long, that are just long cylinders.
Wow. Wow. This was my concept sketch of us connecting them in one way. I was still...
Yeah, it was hard to describe how these vessels will dock with each other.
Right.
And I explained that there were systems that came out that had walkways on them, that came out between ships and grabbed onto each other.
Right.
And that sometimes these ships would dock and travel. They would travel as a cluster. There'd be one in the middle and then cylinders all around, and they'll travel as one big unit. And then when they arrive to a location, they can split up, they can break apart and split off and then go in different directions.
Yeah, and that's what you were trying to show here in this drawing, and I've yet to take a successful stab at it.
Well, from a distance, when you're flying up to these configurations, you think you're flying up to a giant space station because there'll be like T sections, L sections, and as you get closer and closer, you see that it's just a lot of these vessels attached.
So actually, they'll fly in space sometimes at 90
in
degree
configuration,
angles.
yeah.
Oh wow! Yeah. I didn't even know that. I always thought it was something.
No, there's
parallel.
No. You don't need aerodynamics in space.
Oh well, that's going to be fun to depict.
Yeah.
So this was kind of a later version of the arm. I know I didn't really get the grapple right. I didn't really get it's two doors as opposed to one door split. But
it's a lot. It looks a lot thinner and more fragile, but it is made of all of these super high tech materials that it looks real flimsy. But you have craft flying many thousands of miles an hour attached by these thin, look like little thin filaments. We have it looking a little too big and bulky. But for perspective, we kind of had to do that.
Right. So I had a little animation here just to kind of show what it would look like. But yeah, I'm still working on the scale. But yeah, this was just a nice little fun thing to show it extend and retract.
Right.
Yeah.
Next, we're going to talk about the 1 kilometer long spaceships. We actually have these long cylinders, very similar to the one I served in, that are 1 kilometer long, if you can believe that. They're flown up in sections and joined together from the Earth or wherever they are built. There are a number of different shipping yards where they're built, and they are massive. They can be built as well modularly and get longer and longer, and they fly in configurations all connected together as well.
Wow, do you know how many people are on these big long ones?
It just depends on the configuration. If it's configured to be a long haul freighter, very few people. It's going to be mainly material.
Okay.
If it's a troop transport, then there could be thousands. If it's just on a long haul mission and they're doing experiments of various types, it could just be a few thousand.
Here I have it depicted with to scale with an ISRV.
Right. The interstellar research vessel that I served on was much smaller than when it would take it was quite a feeling and sight when you would fly alongside one of these kilometer-long craft.
Wow!
It just when you're cruising in at a slow speed, it takes forever, and these things are massive, and you feel like the craft you're in is pretty massive until you pull up alongside one of these.
Wow. We don't get often to talk about some of this stuff, and so as you talk about it, I get excited again about what can I depict now? Right. So this is great. I love having this.
And this is a depiction. This is sort of depicting the kilometer long or half kilometer mile, depending on the configuration of vessels. The interstellar research vessel, as well as some of the newer naval craft that were starting to be developed as I was leaving. And the shape and size of these craft resembled very closely to another person's designs that I would meet much later. And William Tompkins, I found out, was designing some of the very craft that I saw in outer space decades after he designed them.
Wow. Wow. Just another one. I did, you know, I'm a child of the 70s, and so Battlestar Galactica was absolutely there. And so this is kind of an animation of kind of the Battlestar Galactica version, just this big, massive fleet.
Armada, right?
Yeah, exactly. I'm not sure if they ever flew like this. It sounds like they might have been more connected in a configuration for safety, but that was my vision of just this, like you said, an armada.
Right, that's very interesting. So Oumuamua, we remember, what was it, 2018 or was it 2017? Oumuamua, it was 2018. Oumuamua.
2017 is when we were hearing about it.
Right, and it was the very strange-shaped asteroid that flew into our solar system and was noted as one of the first extra solar system objects to come in to our solar system. And it was all in the news. And during that same time period, I was contacted by Sigmund, a person involved in the Secret Space Program Alliance. And they had sent a expeditionary group out to find out what was going on, because it was traveling in a very odd way. And when they arrived, they found out that this wasn't a meteor, it was an ancient ship that was built out of stone that had been stuck in an orbit around a star not far from us for countless thousands of years. And that as celestial mechanics changed, the tug from our star on the other star caused Oumuamua to then be pulled towards our star. Wow. And then it entered our solar system and then exited back out. And if we show the animation, we'll see that the Secret Space Program flew in a shuttle that landed and docked with this object, and they sent in a crew that went and videotaped the inside, and it was amazing. And this craft was so ancient that it actually belonged to what we call the ancient builder race, a group of over 2 million years ago that disappeared from our region of space that was a dominant force in shaping the way civilizations work together many, many millennia ago. It was a very important discovery.
I mean, even when I first saw it in the news, it was cigar-shaped. It was even how they described it. And so I immediately, before we even talked, I was thinking that's a vessel of some sort. I had no idea of the age and the origin of it. I mean, that's just, it's just so mind-blowing. And so as you were describing it to me and saying that's like it looked like it was petrified stone in certain areas, and then there was also technology on certain parts, and there was a dome that you described. I guess that's where the craft, the shuttle came up to.
Right where this dome was, that's where the basically bridge of this vessel was. And there were all these holes where meteors had hit over God knows how long. And it was through one of these big impact holes that the craft landed, docked, and the astronauts then went into the craft in one of these holes.
Wow. So I did an animation for you for Conscious Life Expo 2017 because I guess we were, 2018. No, that was just
2018.
2018, we just did that. Again, that was another one of those things where we showed up at the event and then we get this idea to do this.
And you create it overnight.
And I'm in the hotel rooms, like, okay, I don't want to say no to such an opportunity, you know. And so it was trying to get it right as well as trying to get it done in enough time to render it, because some of these take a long time to render. So we have the depiction of it here.
And a friend of ours helped develop out the shuttle, correct?
Yes.
Chuck Raymond? Is it?
Chuck Raymond, that's right. Chuck Raymond. Actually, Chuck Raymond did the model for the shuttle in this case, and I just...
plugged it in.
Exactly. I borrowed his model as opposed to building my own, and that's part of the teamwork here. So this is actually the animation that we created for Conscious Life Expo in 2017. Yeah. It moves kind of slow. The idea here, I did multiple camera angles. You mentioned that in the footage, you saw these drone cameras capturing.
Yeah, what happened is, as the craft was moving in, we're hearing, it sounded almost like NASA. You hear beep, beep, and then they're talking about how far they are away from the object they're approaching. And then a silver orb shoots out of the side of the craft, and it's a drone. And then it's a drone camera, and it took some amazing angles and video that they showed us.
Yeah, so I was just trying to do this kind of multi-camera angle approach and dock to this slowly tumbling object. So that was exciting to build.
Yes, it was very, very well depicted compared to what I saw as well.
For Above Majestic, for the title sequence, Roger wanted me to do it. He had heard that it had passed by Mercury. And so we thought it was kind of a romantic idea. Let's do the same shuttle docking around Mercury. Not that that's where it happened, but that was what we kind of came up with as an idea here. And so slightly different camera angle. We're not switching camera angles on this one. Mercury, very interesting color. We found an interesting planet map that had this color. We thought it was beautiful. And again, just thank you, Chuck, for the use of your shuttle craft model.
We talked about in the beginning, in the title sequence, the Nazis had, and the Americans later on, had retrofitted submarines with this electrogravitic technology. And it looked very similar to, my grandfather was in World War II, and he talked about how they would degauss ships, to where if they would go over a mine, it would not give the magnet in the mine a metal to detonate the mine with, the detection of the metal. So it looked very similar when I had seen pictures of the windings that they had around these submarines.
Yeah, I saw some pictures of that degaussing, so that's what I borrowed from.
Right. So it was very clever of them, to not have to build out entire new ships to test out the technologies, the Nazis. And they retrofitted the technology to these submarines, and they flew them into space and were able to do recon of the moon, Jupiter, and other places.
Wow, that's amazing. Here, my first stab at it, I found a free model of a vintage German submarine, and I just started I took all the water stuff off of it, and I just started putting stuff on it. This was basically a test render passing by Pluto. Again, the very rough model, very rough animation, but this was just kind of proof of concept to get us all excited about it, because I think once I showed you this animation,
I knew what you could do.
Then it was like, oh, okay, then all the rest of the next layer of detail came out.
Right, yeah, then I started describing all of the other parts.
Right. And then we get something like this, which is really exciting to look at. This was such an exciting thing to build.
The visual of seeing a submarine that is only under the water. You never get to see a full submarine once it's been deployed. It's always underwater.
Right.
The visual of a submarine lifting up and leaving the atmosphere and then traveling through space it's an amazing visual.
Yes, I'd actually like to do something a little bit more a higher quality version of that, just to actually, because I imagine, would they come out of the water, or were they building these in dry dock?
Well, they were building them in dry dock.
Right.
I didn't hear them lifting up out of water. I've heard of them. They were building them in these secret bases that they had with slave labor, they being the Nazis, right. And then they would test them from there. They wouldn't put them in the water and then launch them from the water.
So it wouldn't be a stretch to consider that maybe they built these spacefaring versions in Antarctica and probably launched them out of Antarctica. I'm just fantasizing about that.
They definitely later on were building craft with slave labor in Antarctica, and then later on handed over that operation to the Americans. Mm-hmm. But they were mainly building these in German and occupied territories.
Okay.
In Germany and occupied territories.
Interesting. So I wonder if there's any sightings of these taking off in the middle of the night out of the Black Forest of Germany or something.
They were really developing this technology a lot during that time period. It wasn't really until they had pretty much lost World War II that they were at a point where they were able to build these things not really in mass, but enough of them to make a difference. And they weren't able to weaponize them for some time. They were able to fly these things around, but they had kinetic weapons. If you're flying and you don't have gravity and you fire a kinetic weapon, it's going to send you spinning around. Right. So they had to develop all of these directed energy weapons and other technologies. So it took them, these technologies didn't get developed until after World War II fully. So the technologies were not there to help them win the war.
Mm-hmm. This next thing is really kind of more of a brainchild that happened between me and Roger. It wasn't really something that you told us. This was the idea that somewhere between these first generation submarines with basically the cable wrapped around the fuselage, that perhaps there, and then the interstellar research vessels, the cigars that you're familiar with, that there's somewhere there may have been a transition, that there might have been something. Right. And so that's where I was, I just kind of took to it and I just concepted, I think I took the strongest, most advanced submarine that the Germans had, and then I modded that one.
Just extrapolated from there.
Right, exactly. I figured that's what they would use. They would use their flagship, no holds barred, just sub, and then they would fit that with their space tech.
It's definitely an interesting concept.
Yeah, so definitely a concept. So
the Germans, after they experimented with the submarines, they began to build out circular craft, the flying saucer that we have become familiar with. They had 3 different sizes. I don't recall offhand exactly the sizes. They were like 20 feet and I can't remember, like 60 or 90 feet across, and then another one that was really large. And these were used for carrying troops and materials to places like the moon when they were building out the Lunar Operation Command. Interesting thing is they call it the Honeyboo. And in the programs, the American military started calling it the honeybee because it made a buzzing, humming noise. Oh, wow. So they would call it the honeybee.
Mm-hmm. Cool. These were just some concepts that I had actually based on some other stuff that I had seen on the internet, to be quite honest.
Yeah, and then there were some on the internet that depicted cannons on the bottom of these craft, which I just described don't work well.
Exactly.
With a kinetic weapon, if you fire, when you shoot a projectile out, it's pushing back as well, so it sends the craft spinning.
So these were based on an inaccurate concept, but again, for me, it's always fun to just kind of build something. I don't even know if you guys were asking for this model at this time. I think I just kind of jumped in, and so I was kind of creating really without talking to you.
Yeah, you were on a roll.
So I kind of created a little nest for them to hang out in, and again, this was just kind of the stills with the guns removed for the Above Majestic title sequence, and
right. And to note the pods that you see on the bottom, you see 3. They have those even to this day on the Tier 3B craft that we fly. And inside are spinning, back then, I don't know what they use, but now they use a type of ceramic, treated ceramic, that is spinning within a field. And they call it a disco ball. Joking around, they would call it a disco ball. And it creates gravity nullification. And then they use conventional jet engines to propel the triangles.
Okay.
They were actually developing, the Nazis were actually developing out the ability to use these pods as the propulsion system, not only to nullify gravity, but to also propel. True electrogravitic propulsion.
Yeah, I that explains why there's the grills on the sides of the TR-3Bs.
Yes.
That's for the jet propulsion.
Right.
The directed jet. Interesting. William Tompkins.
Yeah, so we spoke earlier about William Tompkins. When I was in the programs, not only when I spent time on the smart glass pad, a device that was kind of like an iPad that connected to databases. And you connected with them mentally, the smart glass pad, and you could pull information. And for a couple of decades, I'm pulling information about Nazi spies giving reports and looking at these actual reports and hearing about the development of spacecraft by different engineering groups in America. Little did I know I would actually meet one of these people and meet a person that contributed to both the smart glass pad information and the development of space vessels for the United States. And William Tompkins was one of these people. He had started building models when I believe he was a teenager, of naval vessels when he would go out and visit with to the shipyards with his father. And they were so accurate that it caught the attention of naval intelligence. There were radar dishes that no one was supposed to know about that he had accurately depicted. And they came and after they interrogated his father for a while, they ended up bringing William into the Navy to do ship design and other work for them.
Wow. We had a chance to meet Tompkins in person for the first time. I guess it was March-ish 2017.
That's right.
And I discovered this picture in my archive. I didn't even actually know that I had a picture of me sitting with Tompkins as he's kind of going over a few of his drawings. He brought a very select group of drawings that are pretty much publicly out there. We didn't get to see anything that the public hasn't already seen. But it was really such a great honor just to sit there and talk with him about stuff. So this is probably the most famous drawing.
It is, yes. And it was so far ahead of its time, the way it was drawn with the angles to deflect radar that was back before. Really, we were talking about stealth very, very much. So this was built to be stealth. Its cross sections are meant to deflect radar and LiDAR as well. So the design is a very apt one. It's very similar to the craft that I saw at the end of my service.
Okay, so you actually saw craft somewhat like this.
Yes. The ones that we kind of talked about in the previous animation were very similar and a part of the evolution, I believe, of what he had engineered.
Wow. So seeing this drawing, I mean, of course, it's so inspiring and it's so angular, and you see how it must have been so far ahead of its time. This was probably a drawing from the 60s.
Yeah.
I'm imagining.
60s or early 70s. And I remember Tompkins, when you told him that you could do a 3D depiction of his drawing, he was like a little schoolboy. He was so excited. And I remember when you finally showed it to him, the depiction.
So this was the very most rough versions of this. I'm just getting the basic shape of the craft to match the drawing. And if we look back, I'm going to go back, and we see they're almost these pyramid gem cut structures, and there's the the top part is the bridge. And so this is my imagining of what it might look like from the bridge section as you're looking over the 3D model. And then I did get some help with the texturing of this vessel from Daniel, who's done a number of drawings for Cosmic Disclosure. So he helped me texture this, and so now we have this really beautiful, amazing depiction of Tompkins' vessel. And then I decided to do kind of a fade between the drawing and the model, just to kind of see what we can see there. And so if we look at the drawing, we can actually see the arc of the planet, and we see a couple of groups of...
That's a great effect.
And so when we see it dissolve, it's just all of a sudden it becomes way more visually just exciting.
Yes, and gives people a very good idea of what it looks like visually out there.
Yes. So amazing to consider that this stuff is actually out there in service, and it's been there for quite some time.
Lots of tax dollars flying around in outer space.
So I think this brings us to the last craft.
Yeah. The Dart craft is a craft that began picking me up by the Secret Space Program Alliance. I would be picked up and brought to meetings at the Lunar Operation Command or other places. There were a couple other craft that we haven't depicted yet, but the Dart craft is one that is really cool. It's 5-seater. It's about a little bit larger than an SUV. 2 people in front, 3 seats in back, and it's extremely fast.
Now, when you first told us about this was back in, I think it was the tail end of 2016 that we were first hearing about the Dart coming into your backyard in Texas.
Yes, I was describing it in a lot of my updates and reports, but people were having a hard time visualizing.
And so was I. I mean, so here I was just taking some stabs. These are my I'm just getting the rough shape of it out. And, I was envisioning it on grass, again, very simplified. And this really wasn't hitting the mark. I remember every time I'd show you one of these, you'd kind of give me the, yeah, it's nice. But it wasn't really hitting the mark for you. And so I went back again.
Yeah, and I sent some sketches
as well. And this was my second version. And again, failing to hit the mark. And so then you sent me these drawings.
Yes, my beautiful artwork again.
Which, for these, is just so essential. It's so essential for me to get that. And these curves were actually really tricky to kind of get this kind of a blunt nose. Yeah, this kind of an interesting nose that's not very aircraft-like at all.
Right.
It's kind of a combination of SUV and, aircraft.
It's like a utility vehicle.
Right. And so then we're getting closer now.
Yes.
This is when you started really getting, I'm getting close, I'm hitting the mark.
Right.
And
good enough to proceed.
Good enough to proceed, because we really wanted to animate this. We had done an animation earlier of this.
That's right, for Conscious Life Expo.
Exactly.
And I pretty much described what it was like to fly in when I first started visiting the Lunar Operation Command at the beginning of my service in 1980. It was built in the shape of a swastika. Since then, they've gotten rid of the shape of a swastika with other buildings. But I was describing to you what it was like to fly in, and you thought it'd be a great idea to integrate the Dart with the animation of flying over the old Lunar Operation Command.
Right, exactly, because I had already built that model, and so we just combined them together, and that was something that we did really fast. We did that in the hotel room. It was so intimidating sometimes, I got to tell you something, because you come up with a great idea of the visual idea, and of course I want to deliver it, but there's only so much time you can put into the modeling and the rendering of it. Yeah. And, we've only got a couple days to get it done, in addition to your presentation that we were delivering. I'm so glad that we were able to deliver that, even though it's kind of when you look at the new version, because we have a new version.
Yeah, the new version was great. This was an actual incident not far from my home here in Colorado. For a meeting, I was picked up by a DART and taken to the Lunar Operation Command, and you developed this animation to help people visualize my experience. So, yeah, this depiction has been very helpful. It shows, how you get into the DART,
right,
and approximately what it's like to fly to the moon in such a short period of time.
Right.
I mean, it's like the moon just grows in front of you.
That was so exciting. When you were describing that part of the story, it was really, I wanted to take on the challenge of doing that. Wasn't sure even how I was going to do it, but here it is. Inspired 2001. I mean, how can you not be inspired by 2001? I mean, that's basically what these camera angles are.
Yeah. But, as you see that the most recent version we have here of the Lunar Operation Command shows how, after the Americans took control of the base, they built it out and expanded it. Not only did they expand it out, but they expanded it down. The close by is another subcrater, and that crater goes down into lava tubes. And those lava tubes were exploited as areas that they could pressurize and, create pressurized caverns out of. They even built this huge, I call bell-shaped structure that we see now depicted, that you would fly down into and land your craft and then attend meetings or go to a mission briefing. So these images, I had in the past been describing how it was a bell-shaped building in a lava tube, but no one could picture what I was talking about until you were able to depict this for us.
Great. I'm so glad that I was hitting the mark on that one. That was, it's an exciting thing to hear described. It's quite another thing we went through various iterations on that too. We went through some stuff.
Right, but that really communicates the feeling of what it's like to fly to the Lunar Operation Command and dock with it and see what it's like beneath the surface. How did you get into art, and why did you become so fascinated with doing stuff in outer space?
Well, it's interesting because my father was a draftsman, and he got a job at Teledyne Ryan Aerospace in San Diego. And as it turned out, we're hearing Tompkins talk about where he was having these meetings. I mean, he was probably having these meetings less than a few miles away from where my dad was actually working. And at some point, my dad got a top secret clearance. And so I actually didn't know a lot of what my father was working on.
He could have been working on some of this very stuff we're talking about.
Exactly. And so he was probably working on, so he worked on Surveyor. These are the things that he's told me he's worked on. He worked on Surveyor, he worked on Viking, but he also worked on Apollo, which you would think I would know that growing up. I mean, we had a poster of the moon with some poetry, and it was signed by a couple of the astronauts that went there. But as a kid, it's just in your house all the time. You don't necessarily think, but that was my father, his romantic connection to it. We had a Saturn V rocket model in the home, and just didn't think that. But then I learned much later. I mean, I was an adult by the time I learned that my dad worked in Apollo, and he showed me these tie pins that they would give only to people who worked on the programs. And so I found it really interesting that here my father worked on acknowledged space programs. And then so here I am as an adult visualizing the unacknowledged space programs. And so I've just found that There's a really kind of interesting connection there that I didn't plan. I didn't plan that arc. I went out to become a musician and a graphic designer, and visualizing unacknowledged spacecraft was not something I grew up thinking I was going to do. But
well, does your father know what you're doing now?
He does. He does. You know, I think the conspiracy part
aspect,
of it, right? You know, my father loves and supports, you know, whatever I'm involved in, and but he's very tight-lipped, you know. So whatever he might know,
right,
is
staying in.
Right. But so for me to have this opportunity to kind of, you know, it is kind of a dream sometimes to live in your father's footsteps in a way. I still did my own work. I did my own thing. I didn't become an architect like my father. But to suddenly be converging into that similar place of outer space, which has always been the romantic part. And I think that that's the part of your story, Corey, that really ignited. I mean, we hear all kinds of stories of what is or what could be, and sometimes they fall flat. But there was something about the way your story resonated that not only did we have contact with extraterrestrials, humanity is already out there. And we've been out there for quite a while. There's something about that idea. It's almost like the twins separated at birth. And one twin will feel like there's another part of me out there. And then later on, they realize that there really was. And I feel like collectively, your story lets us, the ones that we kind of feel there's more to this. And then to feel like there's brothers and sisters out there. Yeah. They're separated at birth, you know. And
it's a perfect analogy.
Yeah. So I think that from that consciousness part, we're connecting with that, and it's so it resonates with such truth for me, and it did from the first time I read some of your work, and I'm excited to be continuing to visualize parts of that.
That's great, and it's awesome to see the correlations with your father's work and see how it may have brought you even together, and you seeing some of his points of view or kind of what his life was like during the time period.
Absolutely.
So Rene, I appreciate you being here talking with us today. It was great to talk about the depictions of art and animation that were in Above Majestic. We also we can tell people we're not done, are we?
No, we're not done.
We're going to have some follow-up documentaries coming out. One that's going to be based on a lot of Dr. Sala's work and my testimony about Antarctica, about the all of the secrets going on down there, now by the Americans, but had been established by the Nazis during the late 30s, early 40s. So that is going to be one of our documentaries coming out. Awesome art depicted there. And then following that, we're even going to discuss some of the information that's come out in documents from the DIA, which is the DIA and the Air Force control the military-industrial complex secret space program. So a lot more information to come, a lot more art to come. I'm Corey Goode.
I'm Rene Armenta.
And stand by, there's more to come.